Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going super local, talking sustainability.
Ooh, yeah.
Exploring how global goals, like those SDGs everyone's always talking about,
Right.
how those can actually create real change in our own communities,
Yeah.
like where we live.
Exactly.
And, you might be surprised to hear this, but between 2015 and 2019, there were over 7,900 research publications
Wow.
all about local sustainability.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so clearly a lot of folks are thinking about this.
For sure.
So we're going to be going through all of that research and some real-world policy examples
Okay.
to see what's working, what's not.
Still good.
And most importantly, how you listening right now can connect with some of these efforts in your own community.
Yeah, making it real,
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's such a fascinating area.
Yeah.
Like if you think about it, cities and towns, that's where we can actually see progress towards a more sustainable future, like in a tangible way.
Totally. It's not just some abstract idea. It's about, the places where we live and work every day.
Yeah, exactly.
So what does the research tell us about, where these local efforts are focused?
Well, one theme just jumps out right away. Sustainable cities.
Okay.
Which makes sense, right? Cities are where we see a lot of innovation, but also the biggest sustainability pressures, too.
Yeah.
So things like resource use and pollution.
Social inequality.
So it's not just about, making cities greener. It's about making them work better for everyone.
Absolutely. And you can't have successful sustainability initiatives without good governance. Strong institutions, effective policies, and most importantly, partnerships. And you'll see these key words like strong institutions, partnerships, appearing across multiple research areas. They're really the bedrock of this whole thing.
So SDGs 16 and 17, those are the ones all about institutions and partnerships. They're kind of like the foundation for any local sustainability effort. Exactly. You got to have the right structures and collaborations in place to make things happen,
Yeah.
Without them, even the best ideas can fall flat.
For sure. Okay, so we've got all this research showing how important local action is.
Yeah.
But what about actual policies? Have we seen any global initiatives that are actually supporting communities on the ground?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So since the late 1980s, we've seen a wave of initiatives all aimed at getting local communities involved.
Okay.
One of the earliest ones was Local Agenda 21.
Oh, yeah.
Which came out of the 1992 Earth Summit.
Local Agenda 21, that rings a bell.
Yeah.
Wasn't that a big push to get local governments doing sustainability planning?
It was. It really kicked off this global conversation about the role of local communities in achieving sustainability.
Okay.
Of course, like anything else, these initiatives, they've evolved over time.
So how have they changed since those early days? What kind of trends are we seeing?
Well, at first, the focus was really on raising awareness and setting up processes, laying the groundwork.
Right.
But later initiatives started providing more practical tools and resources.
Okay.
Like, for example, the toolkit for MDGs, localization, gave local governments step-by-step guidance on how to integrate the Millennium Development Goals into their strategies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's one thing to say, hey, sustainability is important,
right,
but you need to give people the resources to actually make it happen.
Totally. You need the tools and the know-how to turn those big ideas into action.
Exactly. And the scope of these initiatives, it's broadened, too.
Okay.
So early agendas, they often focused on, social, economic, political issues.
Yeah.
But then initiatives like the UN Global Compact, they brought environmental sustainability into the mix.
Makes sense. Protecting the environment is kind of crucial for, everything else.
Right. And it's not just local authorities anymore either.
Oh.
We're seeing way more partnerships between communities, cities, businesses.
Okay.
Everyone needs to be involved to achieve these goals.
Yeah, it's a team effort, for sure.
It is.
Collaboration is key.
Yep.
But let's be real, even with the best intentions, things don't always go smoothly.
Nope.
What are some of the roadblocks that communities face when they're trying to put these global goals into action locally?
Well, there are three big ones that come up again and again.
Okay.
Misaligned goals, clashing priorities within the community, and the fact that the future is, inherently unpredictable.
Okay, yeah.
Let's unpack those a bit further.
Okay.
First, misaligned goals. So the SDGs, they're a great framework.
Yeah.
But they're pretty broad.
Yeah.
They might not always align perfectly with the specific needs and priorities of a particular community.
So it's kind of like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
What works in one place might not work in another.
Right.
And this problem is often made worse when global or national agendas are just kind of imposed on communities without really considering their unique context.
Like saying, here's a plan, now go make it work, but not really understanding what's happening on the ground.
Exactly. A good example is Local Agenda 21 in Malaysia.
Okay.
There wasn't enough input from the community, during the planning process.
Okay.
So the program, it felt a bit top-down, and that led to limited buy-in from the community.
Yeah.
And it ultimately just didn't reach its full potential.
So how do we make sure then that those global goals actually resonate with what communities need and want?
You got to flip the script.
Okay.
Take a bottom-up approach.
Okay.
Get those local communities involved in setting the goals from the very beginning.
So instead of telling communities what sustainability should look like, we ask them, what are your sustainability goals?
Yeah.
What matters most to you?
Exactly. That way, those goals and targets, they're meaningful.
Yeah.
For that specific community, and they're more likely to actually take ownership and see it through.
Okay, I like that approach.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that community.
Yeah.
It's not just one big happy group with shared interests.
Right, yeah.
You have all these diverse individuals and groups, and they often have different priorities.
Yeah.
Sometimes even conflicting ones.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And this brings us to roadblock number 2. Clashing priorities.
Yeah, the classic balancing act of competing interests.
Right.
It's like trying to juggle flaming torches. Tricky, to say the least.
Yeah, a good example is Local Agenda 21 in Vienna.
Okay.
There were these competing visions for this public recreation area.
Okay.
So some stakeholders wanted to focus on environmental conservation, while others were prioritizing economic development.
Okay, yeah.
They ended up with a bunch of compromises that didn't really satisfy anyone.
Oh, so how do you navigate that kind of situation? How do you find a balance when different groups have such different visions?
You have to recognize that tension is inevitable. You can't just ignore it.
Right.
You need to lean into those difficult conversations and try to find common ground where you can...
Easier said than done. Are there any tools or techniques that can help make those conversations more productive and bring people together?
Oh, absolutely. Things like community needs analyses can help identify shared priorities.
Okay.
And roundtable discussions, those can provide a platform, for open dialogue and collaborative decision-making.
So finding that sweet spot where most people feel heard and respected, even if it means compromise along the way.
Exactly.
Okay. Sounds like the foundation of any good collaboration, really.
It is.
Finding that shared ground.
Yeah.
Okay. So on to roadblock number 3, the unpredictable future.
Yeah.
That feels like a challenge that we all face, not just in sustainability.
You're absolutely right. The future is uncertain, and that can make long-term planning feel like a shot in the dark.
Oh, it's like trying to predict the weather a year from now.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Exactly. And with sustainability, we're dealing with these complex systems that are constantly evolving.
Right.
Climate change, political shifts, economic downturns. All these things can throw a wrench in the best laid plans.
And don't forget those unknown unknowns.
Oh, yeah.
The things we can't even anticipate.
Right.
Because they're so outside of our current understanding, it's enough to make you want to give up and just binge watch reality TV.
I get it. But hold on. The key here isn't predicting the future perfectly.
Yeah, okay.
It's about being prepared for different possibilities.
So instead of clinging to a rigid plan, you need to be flexible and ready to adapt as things change.
Exactly. We can actually learn a lot from the struggles of Local Agenda 21.
Okay.
There's often too much emphasis on the initial planning and not enough on the long-term monitoring and adaptation.
Okay.
So when those unexpected challenges popped up, communities were caught off guard.
It's like setting sail without a compass or a map. You might start in the right direction,
Right.
but without the ability to navigate, you'll probably end up lost. Okay, so how do we avoid getting lost in that sea of uncertainty? What can communities do to stay on track towards their sustainability goals, even when unexpected things happen?
It's all about what's called exploratory thinking.
Exploratory thinking, okay?
So you question your assumptions.
Okay.
You challenge the status quo, and you build in those future contingencies.
Like having a backup generator for when the power goes out.
Yeah. I love that analogy.
So it's not about predicting the future.
Right.
It's about having a plan B and maybe a plan C ready to go.
Exactly. There are actually some really interesting computational modeling techniques that can help explore potential vulnerabilities and identify those tipping points where you might need to switch gears.
So things like?
Techniques like scenario discovery and stress testing.
Okay.
You know, they let you play out these what-if scenarios and see how robust your plans really are.
It's like running simulations to see how your sustainability strategy holds up under different conditions. Kind of like a video game for planning the future.
You could say that.
I like it.
These models, they can help pinpoint weak points in your plans.
Okay.
And explore alternative pathways to reach your goals, even when things get unpredictable.
I'm seeing a theme here. A lot of these solutions to these roadblocks come down to embracing complexity.
Yeah.
And being flexible.
Oh, sure.
It's not about like one-size-fits-all solutions or rigid plans.
Right.
It's about being adaptable and responsive to the world around us, which is always changing.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Okay, good.
That's precisely why the research we're exploring today proposes this transdisciplinary approach to local sustainability.
A transdisciplinary approach. That sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive into that after a quick break.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back to explore this exciting solution in more detail.
All right, we're back and ready to unpack this whole transdisciplinary approach to local sustainability.
Yeah.
It sounds like a pretty powerful way to deal with all those roadblocks we were just talking about.
So what does it actually look like when you try to put it into practice?
It's kind of like a toolkit that combines the analytical power of science with the real-world wisdom of actual community involvement.
Yeah.
Bringing together all those different perspectives and knowledge systems to create solutions that are more well-rounded and resilient.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture, but let's break it down even further. What are the core components of this toolkit? What makes it work?
Well, the source we're looking at, it outlines 3 key pillars that form the foundation of this approach. Okay. The first one is all about what we were talking about earlier, jointly framing those goals and actions.
Right, letting communities define their own sustainability priorities.
Yeah. Instead
of having these like external agendas imposed on them.
Exactly. That first pillar puts that bottom-up approach right at the center.
Okay.
Involves using all sorts of participatory processes.
Like what?
Oh, workshops, focus groups, even just simple listening posts.
Oh, cool. To
really engage with communities and figure out, what are their key sustainability goals.
Okay.
And then developing actions that are actually relevant,
So not just asking communities what they want, but working with them to come up with solutions that are doable that will actually make a difference.
Exactly. A great example of this in action is the work that was done in Forest, Australia.
Oh, yeah, I remember them.
You remember that community?
Yeah, transitioning from like forestry and dairy farming to ecotourism.
Right.
They were grappling with some tough sustainability issues like housing pressures and waste management.
Yeah, a pretty big shift for that community.
It was. So what happened?
Well, researchers, they partnered with the forest community.
Okay.
And they use a bunch of different participatory approaches to figure out what their top sustainability priorities were.
Right.
So they set up these listening posts all around town to gather input from residents.
Cool.
They held all these informal kitchen table discussions.
Oh, wow.
To dig deeper into those priorities.
Okay.
They even hosted community open houses to share their findings and brainstorm solutions together.
That's really impressive. They went all out to make sure that community was involved in a meaningful way.
They did, and it had a huge impact.
What happened?
Through all those participatory processes, that community was able to pinpoint which SDGs actually resonated with their local context.
Okay.
They articulated this shared vision for a sustainable future.
Wow.
And they even came up with really concrete ideas for achieving their goals.
So it wasn't just talk. They actually came up with a plan. Did they put it into action?
They did.
Yeah.
The results of this whole collaborative process, they directly informed the community's strategic plan.
Oh, wow.
Which then opened the door for potential investment from local government agencies.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a fantastic example of how participatory goal setting can lead to real, tangible action.
It is so inspiring. It's amazing to see how a small community can really band together and make a difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's pillar number 1.
Yeah.
Jointly framing those goals and actions. What about pillar number 2?
Pillar number 2 focuses on evaluating critical uncertainties.
Okay.
Remember our conversation about the unpredictable nature of the future.
Yeah.
How important it is to be prepared for different possibilities.
Yeah, that was a good dose of reality.
Right.
It's so easy to get caught up planning for a future that might not even happen.
Exactly. The second pillar is all about acknowledging that uncertainty and actually incorporating it into your decision-making process.
Okay.
It's not about being pessimistic. It's about being realistic and prepared.
So instead of burying our heads in the sand and hoping for the best, we need to try to figure out what those uncertainties might be and how to deal with them. But how do we do that? It's not like we can predict the future with any certainty.
That's where the power of computational modeling comes in.
Okay.
You remember those future simulators we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Techniques like scenario discovery, stress testing.
Yeah, right.
They let us explore different possible futures in a systematic way and assess how those uncertainties might affect our sustainability goals.
So we can use these models to see how different scenarios might play out and how our plans might hold up under different conditions.
You got it. And by modeling all those different scenarios, we can pinpoint potential weak points in our plans and come up with strategies to actually mitigate those risks.
Okay.
Being proactive instead of reactive.
Gotcha. I'm seeing how these first two pillars work together. First, you engage the community to define those sustainability goals.
Right.
And then you use these modeling techniques to see how those goals might be impacted by future uncertainties and challenges.
Precisely. And that leads us beautifully into the third pillar, co-creating adaptive pathways.
Ooh, adaptive pathways. That sounds promising. Tell me more.
So an adaptive pathway is essentially a roadmap for achieving those long-term sustainability goals, even when things get unpredictable.
Yeah.
It's a flexible, responsive approach that allows you to adjust your course as conditions change.
I like this instead of clinging to a rigid plan. Right.
You've got this flexible roadmap to guide you through uncharted territory.
Exactly. The source actually uses a great visual to illustrate this adaptive pathway concept.
Right.
Using this hypothetical example of a regional agricultural community.
Perfect. I'm a visual learner, so I'd love to see how this adaptive pathway actually plays out in a real-world setting.
Okay, so picture this agricultural community.
Okay.
They've identified their 3 main local priorities based on the SDGs. So improving agricultural productivity.
Okay. Yeah.
Making sure that their water use is sustainable and protecting their regional ecosystems.
We do standard sustainability stuff.
Yeah, super important, especially for a community that relies on agriculture.
Absolutely.
But they also know that unpredictable events like, droughts, bushfires, or even just fluctuating agricultural markets could totally throw their plans off course.
Of course.
So they use these computational models to explore how those uncertainties might impact their goals. Like, they're playing a strategic game trying to anticipate all the different moves that Mother Nature might throw at them.
What a great analogy. And through this whole modeling process, they can identify these potential tipping points. Those critical thresholds where their current plan might not be effective anymore. For example, they might discover that if there's a prolonged drought, they could decimate their crops. And make their agricultural productivity goals impossible to achieve.
So what happens when they hit one of those tipping points? Do they just abandon their goals?
Not at all. That's where the adaptive part of the pathway comes in. So they've created this whole series of actions, each with its own tipping point. And they've outlined these alternative approaches to take if those tipping points are reached.
So instead of having a single plan that might just crumble under pressure, they have multiple paths that they can take depending on what happens.
Exactly. It's a much more flexible and resilient way to approach planning for the long term.
Okay, this is making sense, but how do they actually create this adaptive pathway? Who's involved in that process?
That's the beauty of the transdisciplinary approach. It's this collaborative effort that brings researchers and stakeholders together.
Collaboration is key. I'm sensing a theme here.
You got it.
Okay.
So those researchers, they bring their expertise in modeling, scenario planning, and analyzing data. While the stakeholders, they bring their lived experience, their values, and their understanding of the local context.
So it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
The researchers help the communities understand, like, the complexities of the future. And communities help the researchers understand, like, the nuances of their local realities.
Exactly. It's about bridging that gap between science and society. To create solutions that are both scientifically sound and socially acceptable.
I'm convinced this transdisciplinary approach sounds like a really solid way to navigate all the complexities of local sustainability. But let's be real for a moment. Working across all those disciplines and engaging all these different stakeholders can't be easy, like trying to herd cats, except the cats are scientists and policymakers and community members, each with their own strong opinions and agendas.
You're not wrong. Transdisciplinary work, it can definitely be messy and complex.
Okay.
But it's also incredibly rewarding.
Good. I'm not ready to give up on this transdisciplinary dream just yet.
Okay.
So what are some of those common hurdles we might encounter along the way, and how do we overcome them?
One of the biggest challenges is figuring out the right mix of, participatory approaches and modeling for each situation.
Okay.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
What works for one community might not work for another.
Right.
And even within the same community, different issues might require different approaches.
It's about finding that balance between being scientifically rigorous and making sure the community is truly engaged, which probably requires a lot of flexibility and creativity.
Absolutely. Another challenge is making sure that everyone has a voice in these participatory processes, that no one group is dominating the conversation.
Yeah. That's crucial. It's about creating a level playing field where everyone feels empowered to share their ideas and perspectives.
Exactly. And then, of course, there are all those practical barriers.
Oh, yeah. The realities of the real world.
Right.
People have busy lives and limited time and resources.
Exactly. So we have to contend with things like stakeholder fatigue, conflicting interests, and sometimes people just aren't willing to participate.
It happens.
So getting everyone on board and keeping them engaged over time can be really tough.
Yeah, I imagine the modeling side of things can be challenging too.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with complex systems and mountains of data.
You're absolutely right.
So it's not just about crunching numbers, but about turning those numbers into insights that can guide real-world action.
Exactly. But here's the good news.
Okay.
Despite all these challenges, the field of transdisciplinary research, it's constantly evolving.
Okay.
Researchers, they're developing new tools and techniques
to
make those participatory processes more inclusive, more equitable, and advances in computing power and data visualization are making those modeling approaches a lot more user-friendly and accessible.
So it's like we're constantly upgrading our transdisciplinary toolkit.
Exactly.
With all these new features and improvements.
And as those tools become more sophisticated and easier to use,
the
potential for transdisciplinary innovation, it's just going to continue to grow.
That's encouraging. Sounds like transdisciplinary research is a field with a lot of promise, even if it's not always easy.
Absolutely. I know all this talk about frameworks and toolkits.
Right.
It can sometimes feel a bit abstract.
Yeah.
So let's bring it back down to earth.
Okay.
And look at some real-world examples.
Yes.
Of how this transdisciplinary approach has been used to achieve tangible results.
I love seeing how these ideas play out in practice. What kind of success stories can you share?
Well, one really inspiring example comes from Indonesia, where they used a transdisciplinary approach to tackle this really devastating issue of peatland degradation.
Peatlands. I remember reading about those. They're super important for storing carbon, right?
You're absolutely right.
They're like giant carbon sinks, which helps regulate our climate.
Exactly, but they're also incredibly vulnerable to degradation.
Okay.
Especially from things like deforestation and drainage for agriculture.
Yeah.
And when peatlands are degraded, all that stored carbon gets released back into the atmosphere.
Right, which contributes to climate change.
Yeah, so it's like this double whammy.
Yeah. Definitely not good. So how did this transdisciplinary approach help to address this problem in Indonesia?
So back in 2015, Indonesia experienced some really devastating peat and forest fires.
Oh, wow.
That caused just widespread damage.
Oh, no.
Social, economic, environmental.
Yeah.
Those fires, they released massive amounts of greenhouse gases, caused terrible air pollution, destroyed vital ecosystems.
I can only imagine what was the response.
Well, the Indonesian government established the Peatland Restoration Agency in 2016 to coordinate all the restoration efforts across the country. And one of their key strategies was this village-based program called the Peat Care Village.
The Peat Care Village. I love that name.
It's very community-oriented.
It is.
And that's precisely what makes it so effective.
Okay.
The program takes this bottom-up approach, working directly with local communities to restore those degraded peatlands.
So it's not just about planting trees, it's about empowering those communities to take ownership of their environment and their resources.
You got it. The program focuses on building trust, fostering collaboration, and making sure that villagers' voices are actually heard. Okay. They use all these participatory processes like, workshops, community meetings, to figure out, what the local needs and priorities are.
Okay.
And then they work with those villagers to actually develop restoration plans that are tailored to their specific context.
There's that bottom-up approach. Again, it seems like such a crucial element in successful sustainability initiatives.
Really is. And the Peak Care Village program, it actually takes it a step further.
Okay, how so?
By incorporating these really practical solutions that benefit both the environment and the community.
Okay, I'm curious, what kind of solutions are we talking about here?
One of the key challenges is shifting away from traditional slash-and-burn agriculture, which is a major driver of peatland degradation.
Right.
So to address that, the program set up these demonstration plots to showcase alternative farming techniques that are more sustainable, things like agroforestry and polluticulture, which is basically cultivating crops that are specifically adapted to those wetland environments.
So they're not just telling people to stop burning peatlands.
Right.
They're showing them viable alternatives that could improve their livelihoods.
Exactly. By providing those economic incentives like training and support for those new agricultural techniques, they're making sustainability a more attractive option.
That's brilliant. It's about making sustainability work for people, not against them. What other strategies does this program use to engage communities?
Another really important aspect is the establishment of local monitoring systems to track the progress of those restoration efforts.
So it's not just outsiders coming in and doing all the work. It's about empowering those local communities to take charge of their own environment.
You got it. And the results of this transdisciplinary approach, they've been pretty remarkable.
Okay, like what?
The Peak Care Village program. It's not only restored these vital peatland ecosystems, it's also contributed to multiple SDGs.
Which ones?
Things like, poverty eradication, improved health, climate change, mitigation, sustainable land management.
Wow.
It's a win-win for both people and the planet.
That's incredible. It's so inspiring to see how a well-designed, community-driven program can make such a huge impact. Okay, so we've seen how this transdisciplinary approach has been successful in Indonesia. You have any other examples? I'm eager to see how this toolkit can be applied in other contexts.
Absolutely. Another fantastic example comes from the Netherlands.
Oh, the Netherlands.
A country that's really known for its innovative approach to water management.
Isn't that the country that's practically built on water? I mean, they've been dealing with those challenges of living below sea level for centuries.
That's right. The Netherlands has this really long and impressive history of water management. And they've become world leaders in developing these sustainable solutions to really complex water challenges. One of their most ambitious initiatives is the Delta program, which is this comprehensive plan to protect the Rhine Delta region from flooding and make sure their water resources are sustainable for the long term.
The Rhine Delta, that's a pretty important region, right?
It is. The Rhine is one of Europe's major rivers. And the Delta region, it's home to millions of people.
Right.
Essential infrastructure and valuable ecosystems.
So protecting that region from the threat of flooding and sea level rise is a top priority for the Dutch government.
Absolutely.
Okay, I can see why they've invested so much in water management. So how does this Delta program fit into this transdisciplinary approach that we've been talking about?
So the Delta program, it's a prime example of adaptive planning in action. It's this long-term strategy that incorporates scientific modeling, A&D stakeholder engagement to develop these flexible and resilient solutions.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about how they're using those two approaches together.
Well, on the modeling side, they've developed these really sophisticated computational models to assess the impacts of climate change and sea level rise, all those factors on the Delta region. And these models let them explore different scenarios.
So they're running simulations to see how those different interventions might impact the future of the Delta.
Exactly. And these models, they're not just about predicting the future. They're also used to inform decision-making and guide the development of those adaptive pathways we discussed earlier.
Right, those flexible roadmaps that allow for adjustments along the way.
Precisely the Delta program. It's full of those adaptive pathways.
Okay.
For example, they've developed a pathway for flood risk management.
Okay.
That outlines a whole series of actions, each with its own tipping point.
Okay.
To be implemented over the next century.
Wow, they're planning 100 years into the future? That's some serious long-term thinking.
It is. And it's absolutely essential for addressing challenges like climate change that unfold over such long timescales.
Yeah.
But the Delta program, it doesn't stop at modeling.
Okay.
They also recognize how important stakeholder engagement is in developing and implementing these adaptive pathways.
Of course, you can't just impose these plans on people. You have to involve those who are going to be most affected by them.
Exactly. The Delta program has this really strong emphasis on collaboration and co-creation.
Oh, good.
They've established this whole network of experts, stakeholders, community representatives, all working together to identify priorities, assess risks, develop solutions.
So it's not just scientists and policymakers making these decisions in a vacuum.
Right.
It's a truly collaborative effort that takes into account a wide range of perspectives.
Precisely. And one area where this collaboration has been especially successful is in developing this monitoring system for flood risk management.
Monitoring crucial for any adaptive plan.
Oh, yeah.
You need to track your progress, identify problems early on, and be able to change course as needed.
Exactly. And the Delta program, they've taken a really collaborative approach to developing their monitoring system.
Okay, how so?
They brought together this diverse group of experts. Hydrologists, engineers, ecologists, social scientists.
Wow, the whole team.
To identify those key signposts and signals that would indicate a need for adaptation.
So it's not just about measuring things like water levels and rainfall. They're looking at a whole range of indicators, including social and ecological factors.
Exactly. They're looking for those early warning signs that might suggest that their current flood risk management strategy isn't working anymore, which would then trigger the implementation of alternative measures that are outlined in their adaptive pathway.
It's like having a sophisticated early warning system for the whole Delta region.
That's a great way to put it. And by involving all those stakeholders in the development of this monitoring system, they've made sure that it's actually tailored to the specific needs and priorities of the region.
Amazing. The Delta program really sounds like a prime example of how transdisciplinary innovation can be used to tackle those complex sustainability challenges. Combining the power of scientific analysis with the wisdom and experience of those living in the region to create solutions that are both effective and sustainable.
Exactly.
Okay, all this talk about peatlands and Delta regions has me feeling inspired to see those real-world examples of sustainability in action for myself. But before I book my plane ticket, let's not forget that even with this robust toolkit, transdisciplinary work can still be challenging.
You're right. We were just discussing some of those challenges earlier. It's not always easy to bring all those different disciplines together and manage all those competing priorities and navigate the complexities of stakeholder engagement. So it's not a quick fix. It's a long-term commitment to collaboration and innovation.
But despite those challenges, the potential rewards are huge.
They are.
By working together across disciplines and engaging all those diverse stakeholders, we can create more well-rounded, more equitable, and more resilient solutions to these incredibly complex sustainability challenges that our world is facing.
Absolutely.
So even though it might get messy, sometimes this transdisciplinary approach is still the best way to make real progress toward achieving those SDGs.
I completely agree.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from like the big picture of local sustainability research to the nitty-gritty details of how transdisciplinary innovation actually works. Before we wrap things up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on what we've learned today. What are the key takeaways that you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I think the most important takeaway is that achieving the SDGs, it's not just a top-down effort. It really requires a shift toward these collaborative, locally driven initiatives that empower communities to become the drivers of change.
It's about recognizing that sustainability isn't something that's done to communities. It's something that's done with communities.
Exactly. And the transdisciplinary approach, it provides this really powerful framework for fostering that kind of collaboration. By combining, the rigor of scientific analysis with the richness of stakeholder engagement, we can create solutions that are more holistic, more equitable, more resilient, and that benefit both people and the planet.
It's about bridging that gap between science and society to create a more sustainable future for everyone.
Precisely.
Well said. This has been an incredibly insightful and inspiring deep dive. I'm feeling energized and ready to make a difference in my own community. What about you?
Totally. Hearing those stories is super motivating. But before we all rush out and start our own sustainability revolutions,
Right.
I have one last question for you.
Okay.
If our listeners could take away just one key message from this whole deep dive, what would it be? What's the one thing you hope they remember?
I'd say think about your own community. What are the unique sustainability challenges that you see? And how could you use the principles on this whole transdisciplinary approach to make a difference?
It's about taking those big global ideas and figuring out how they connect to our everyday lives, our own backyard.
Exactly. And remember, even small actions at the local level, they can make a big difference.
Yeah.
They all contribute to that bigger picture of a more sustainable future. I love that it's a reminder that we all have a role to play, no matter how big or small our actions might seem.
Yeah.
Who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be inspired to start their own Peat Care Village or Delta program right here in their community.
That would be fantastic.
It's about realizing that we all have the power to create change right where we are.
Absolutely.
Okay, fellow deep divers, that's a wrap for today's episode. We explored the world of local sustainability, uncovered the challenges, Andy, most importantly, the solutions. So hopefully you're feeling empowered to make a difference right where you live.
Yeah, go make a difference.
And don't forget, if you want to dive even deeper into all this, we've got a ton of extra resources and links to all the research we talked about over on our website.
It's all there.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been fun.
And remember, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep making a difference.